الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. إن الحمد لله رب العالمين وإنه هو الحق المبين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So the topic for today, when the brothers invited me to speak, is about racism, right? So I'm sure, since all of us here have been living in the U.S. and we're pretty keen about what's happening around the world and in the news and what have you. So this term, racism, kind of comes up very frequently, right? So for as Muslims, it's important for us to understand what this word means, what the implications are, meaning the consequences of what happens when someone manifests or puts this term or this concept into action, how it affects other people, and if we end up doing things in the name of racism, how does it affect other people, right? That when he created the soul and the body of Adam, the father of humanity, peace be upon him, alayhi salam, and when he commanded the angels to prostrate to Adam, to indicate that Adam alayhi salam is the supreme being above all other beings that Allah placed into existence. When Allah commanded the angels to make sujood to Adam alayhi salam, they did it. And a shaitan at the time, he was Muslim before he committed a ridda, before he committed apostasy. And he was among the company of the angels. And since he was among their company, he was also obligated to do what Allah commanded them to do, but he refused. And when Allah commanded the angels to prostrate to Adam, to make sujood to Adam, alayhi salam, they did it, but a shaitan refused. And Allah speaks about this conversation more than once in the Quran that he has with a shaitan. And Allah questions him. Allah asks him, what prevented you from doing what I commanded you to do? And a shaitan, he said, I am better than him. Because you created me from fire, and you created me from fire, and you created him from the dust. But there's a problem. A shaitan, Satan, he had no proof as to who or what was better. No one told him that fire was better than dust or that dust was better than fire. He had no reference point to determine who or what was better or which substance that Allah chose to create was better. So there was no proof that one substance was better than the other. But out of his arrogance, he chose to conclude that he was better based on his perception, which wasn't reality, that since he was created from fire, he assumed that fire was superior to the dust. And Allah mentions in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, Allah says, أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Allah says he refused, he sought pride, and he became among the disbelievers. So this term, which is commonly is known as al-istikbar, which means arrogance. Al-istikbar is from the Arabic verb astakbara, which Allah mentions in the Quran. Astakbara means to seek pride, he sought pride. So what that means is that it means that you seek greatness at the expense of belittling or disrespecting other people. Just as Muhammad, peace be upon him, mentioned, that is recorded in Realty Salihin by Nawawi. Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, arrogance is denying truth and disrespecting people. So whenever we try to place ourselves here at the expense of making someone else feel low, that is al-istikbar, that is arrogance. So continuing on, because of the hatred that a shaitan had for Adam alayhi salam, he made it his life's mission to whisper to us, to lead us astray. And in fact, the conversation that shaitan has with Allah in the Quran, Allah, he tells Allah, he said, "Bima ghawaytani," because you have disgraced me, I will lead this creation of yours astray. And he said, I will approach them from their fronts, from their rears, from their sides, and you will find most of them ungrateful. So basically what shaitan was trying to do is that he was trying to prove Allah wrong. And we know that's not possible, but that's what he was trying to do. What he was trying to say is that you're going to find most of them just like me. That's what the shaitan was. That's the point that the shaitan was trying to say. So throughout his existence until Yom Al-Qiyamah, until the day of standing, as long as human beings exist on the earth, a shaitan, Satan, is going to try his best to lead us to the fire exactly where he's going. And it's important for us to be aware of the mission of a shaitan. And this is why Allah says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ, and do not follow the footsteps of a shaitan. And Allah warns us multiple times in the Quran, he is aduwwun mubin. He is an open, clear enemy to you. So one of the tactics that a shaitan uses to lead human beings astray is literally the exact same thing that led him astray, al-asabiyya. So al-asabiyya can easily be translated into a common term that's used in the media known as xenophobia. So al-asabiyya means to discriminate or to have a bias or to show hatred towards from someone based on things that we don't have control over. For example, if you see someone, let's say for example, who has an illness or a medical sickness, right? Or someone who has a broken leg or someone who's in a wheelchair, right? And oftentimes, like in school, there's a common, very popular saying in America and elsewhere. It's called "kids are cruel." So there's a lot of truth in that. So and many of you are young enough, you've probably witnessed this. Like in school, you see people who they may walk funny, or they might talk funny, or they may stutter, or they may be like in special ed or what have you, and people make fun of them, right? And that's literally a manifestation. That's literally how asabiyya is enacted. That's how it materializes. So when people do that, that's a form of xenophobia. That's a form of discrimination against someone based on something that they have little to no control over, right? And again, like I said, let's say for example, if someone's in a wheelchair and you make a joke about them, or you make fun of them, or if someone has a cane or is walking with crutches and they fall because they may slip or something like that, and you make fun of them. This is asabiyya, right? Let's say, for example, if you see an elderly person, right? Or if you see a person who doesn't have an arm, or who doesn't have a leg, or who doesn't have teeth, or what have you, and you make fun of that person, or you do something mean to that person. Or let's say, for example, if a person is shorter than you are, right? Or if a person is not as athletic as you are, or if a person is not as strong as you are, and you make fun of that person, right? This is asabiyya, this is xenophobia. Let's say, for example, if they have like weight problems, right? Let's say, for example, if a person is heavier than everyone else, and people, they make fun of that person because of their weight. Those type of things. These things are discrimination, right? Let's say, for example, if someone's skin complexion is different, right? And you make fun of that person, or any other feature that they have, right? Like I remember, but Islamically that's wrong, because Allah created the face of those people, and there's beauty in all of the creation of Allah. So when you mock a person for the features that Allah created with, when you mock the features that Allah created a person with, you're mocking the majesty of Allah in a sense. Because there's a purpose, there's a maslahah, there's a reason why Allah created different people in different ways. Like when Allah says in Surah Al-Hujurat, in the chapter of the cave dwellings, chapter 49, Allah explains how He created people differently. Allah speaks about how He created people into nations and tribes to recognize one another. And then Allah says, the best of you with Allah are those who are most pious. And the Islamic definition of a taqwa, piety, is to place a barrier between ourselves and whatever Allah hates. So the only people who are better than other people are people who are more obedient to Allah than other people. So that has nothing to do with your skin complexion or where you come from or what language you speak. And even like I said, a lot of people when they come here to the US or when they go to other places, people mock them and they discriminate against them because they don't speak the same language. and they're purposely denied housing, and they're purposely denied work because of their immigration status, or because they don't speak English, or because they don't speak the dominant language or languages of a country. And all of this is wrong Islamically. But in spite of the fact that this is wrong Islamically, you find that us as Muslims, we haven't taken the command and the advice of Allah to be aware of the whispers and the deception of ash-shaytan. Because again, it's very common, especially depending on community to community in the Muslim world, anywhere, whether it's a Muslim country or Muslim majority country, or here in the United States, you have Muslim communities who do a lot of negative things or say a lot of negative things to each other, right? For example, 5 months ago, there was a person by the name of Saeed Rajia. He's pretty popular. He's Muslim Somali from Canada, from Toronto. And he gave a khutbah in Nairobi, Kenya. And he was on the minbar, the platform of Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he said some very negative things about Afro-Americans, like persons like myself. Said some very negative things. Because of the age sensitivity, I'm not at liberty to discuss at length what he said exactly, but he said some very negative things, some very hurtful things. And when these things were unearthed, these things went very viral through social media, and it gave rise to what people really hold into their hearts. And Allah speaks about this when Allah speaks about when people say negative things. Allah says what they retain, what they hold in their hearts, is worse than what they say from their mouths. So oftentimes, your speech is a direct indicator of what you think and how you feel. And oftentimes, out of Allah's justice, He will expose what we think and how we feel by compelling us to really speak truth to what we think and how we feel. So when this situation got really hot and heavy, Saeed Rajia, he released a video and he called himself apologizing for what he said. But in all reality, he indicted himself even further. He made himself look even more guilty. Because what he said was a slip of the tongue. Now that's very problematic because he said the exact same thing in the exact same way in 2 different languages. Now, if someone had a slip or something, or they made a mistake referring to what they spoke, they're not going to have the intellectual capacity to say the same thing in multiple languages. So there's a very common saying that anything done more than once is intentional. So he literally said the same thing, the same way, with the same intensity in 2 different languages. That requires intelligence. That requires methodology. That requires purpose. That requires intent. That requires motivation. So there's no human way that was a slip of the tongue when a person says the exact same thing, the exact same way, with the same intensity in more than one language. So it's very evident that this person meant what they said. So by and large, he didn't even apologize for what he said because it was very evident based on how he tried to cover for what he said that he meant what he said. So this also became just as viral through social media as what he had originally said. And in all reality, his so-called apology was literally worse than what he said. Because it's bad enough that he said what he said against Afro-Americans, but the fact that he tried to give himself an excuse, it was like he was trying to justify what he said, which is literally worse. So some of the lessons that should be learned from those type of things is that we have to be very sincere, especially if we are entrusted to teach people knowledge about Islam, especially if we're giving the khutbah, if we're on the minbar, the platform of Muhammad, peace be upon him, because there's a very popular saying, it says, it's never too late to say you're sorry. And that's not true. Sometimes it is too late to say you're sorry for things, because sometimes you say something and it carries way beyond you. And the ripple effects are widely expanded. Sometimes when we say something, we may deem it as not a big deal, but we have no idea how much of a big deal it is to someone else. You might say something mean to another person, and you may not even think that that person took it that seriously. But it may be something very hurtful to that person that will literally affect that person for the rest of their lives. So we have to be very careful what we say, who we say it to, how we say it. As Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, he said, the Muslim is one who protects other people from their statements and their actions. And the believer is one who protects the lives and properties of other people. Now, just looking from that first part of that narration, in which Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, the Muslim is one who protects people from his statement and his action. This gives a clear indication that we're obligated Islamically to be very careful what we say to people, because we really have no idea what type of effects, positive or negative, that these things may have. And I'm sure all of you have had people say things about you that were mean-spirited, that were negative, and regardless of whether they meant what they said or not, it still had a negative effect on you, right? And then vice versa. I'm sure all of us here, I'm sure all of us have said negative things to other people, and regardless of whether we meant it or not, they've had negative effects on other people. Because once you say something, it's already out there. You can't just take your words back and reverse the process as though the person didn't hear what you said, or you can't undo what you've already done. It's too late after that. And once you say something, once you release language, once you release an action, you're no longer in control over the results of what's said and what's done. Prior to you releasing the action, or prior to you releasing the statement, you're in full control. We're always in control of our words before we say them. But once we say them, we're no longer in control. It's a popular saying that you're in control of your words before you speak them. After you speak them, your words are now in control of you. Because more often than not, most people are only going to judge us based on what we're known to have said and what we're known to have done. Most of us are not going to be judged by who we really are. Most of us are only going to be judged based upon what other people see us doing and saying, like our reputation. Now, obviously, your character and your reputation, they're not always the same. So character and reputation are mutually exclusive, meaning they're not the same. Your character, life goes on. Like, for example, you guys are pretty young, right? So your reputation now, whether you're in like elementary school or middle school or high school, is going to change significantly when you get into college or when you graduate college. You're not going to be the same person in terms of reputation, in terms of what you're known for necessarily. Who you are internally is always going to be the same. It's just that you have a choice whether to be a positive person or a negative person. But unfortunately, many of us make the choice to be negative people as opposed to positive people. So bringing it back full circle in terms of racism, like I said, again, this subject is very dense, and because of the audience, I'm actually kind of like restricted and like constrained, and I'm like kind of like disallowed from like really going full throttle what I originally intended to say, because I didn't realize how young the ages were going to be. So I want to be respectful and considerate to the ages. So there's a lot of things that I want to say, but I really can't say because of it's not age appropriate, if that makes sense. We have to know that anything that we say or that we do, we pretty much know whether it's positive or negative. There's certain key universal things that, and this is just something that's from al-fitra, it's just something from nature, that Allah has embedded, instilled inside every human being. So even as young as the youngest person here is now, they have some type of capacity and intelligence to grasp what words mean, what language means. Let's say, for example, if your parents say a word, even if it's not like a curse word or a negative word, but sometimes words in any language, regardless of what language that you grow up speaking, whether it's English or whether it's Bahasa, Arabic, Urdu, whatever, Farsi, whatever language, there's certain words that even if you don't know the meaning of the word, you feel it. Let's say, for example, just randomly, if someone says a word, a new word, it has a psycho-emotional effect on you. It has a spiritual effect on you. You may not know what the word means, but you feel the word. Because in communication, especially through my discipline, my profession as a chaplain, we study what's known as human behavior. And with human behavior, we study human communication. And it's a known fact that 80% of communication is nonverbal. So with that being said, I can literally look at the audience and tell who's really being attentive to what I'm saying versus who's not. Just literally based on body language. And even in terms of body language can be very deceptive. A person can have a posture that it appears that they're being attentive, but they're really ignoring what I'm saying. And then also a person, they may have the appearance of ignoring what I'm saying, but they can actually be attentive. So even in terms of body language is kind of funny. But just in general, 80% of your communication deals directly with body language. How you posture, your facial expression, whether you sit up like this or whether you do like this, right? So all of those things are important. Even in terms of how you have your legs, whether your legs are like this, or whether they're like this, or whether you're laying down like this, all of these things are important. All of these things are part of communication. So when we communicate with one another, we have to be very cognizant, meaning we have to think. We have to use aql, we have to use intellect, intelligence. And we have to be very practical, realistic, and we have to be very careful what we say to people and what we do to people. Because again, we don't know the type of effects that it's going to have on a person. So what we say can have positive effects, what we say can have negative effects. But for us as Muslims, it's important that anything that we say and that we do, we have to make sure that we try our best to always have a positive impact and a positive effect on people. Because anything that we do that harms people, our hisab is with Allah. Allah is going to hold us into account for it. For example, when Allah speaks in Surah Al-Kahf, chapter of the cave, chapter 18, verses 32 to 42, when Allah speaks about how He gave gardens and property to two people, and Allah speaks about them being neighbors. So Allah says that one neighbor disrespected his neighbor and said, "Oh, I have more wealth and property than you." So he tried to make him feel low, right? So then Allah says he departed from his garden and he oppressed himself. So that's very important. So when we do things that harm other people, not only are we harming those people, we're actually harming ourselves. And one of the reasons why we continue to cause harm to other people is because we're not thinking Islamically that we're also oppressing ourselves just as much as we oppress other people. So when that person oppressed his neighbor, Allah says he departed from his garden and he oppressed himself. And then Allah says his neighbor corrected him. And his neighbor reminded him, why didn't you say whatever Allah wills just because you see me with less property or wealth and children as you? And then Allah says, perhaps Allah will send a torment upon your garden. And Allah did exactly what that person said as a sign to humble and humiliate that person. So Allah speaks about how He placed the husband, a torment, a calamity upon that person's property. And that person was no longer able to grow any crops or harvest any vegetation from that person's property. And Allah speaks about how the person was crying and weeping about what they spent on their property and that they weren't able to benefit from it. That was the price that the person paid for oppressing his neighbor. So we read this chapter of the Quran every Friday, or almost every Friday. But that particular portion of the Quran, of that chapter, of chapter 18, we completely miss the point, most of us. Because most of us, we do exactly what that person did to his neighbor. Most of us, we speak ill of each other, and we try to prop ourselves up as though we're superior, and we try to treat other people like they're inferior. We literally do the same thing that Allah mentions that there's a punishment awaiting for in Surah chapter 18. So, like I said, I know this is a very dense topic, and like I said, unfortunately, because of the age sensitivity, it's forcing me to not be as open about the subject matter as I would like to be. But one of the things that I would like to do is I would like to open it up for questions or comments about what the audience feels racism is, or even what they feel, how they've been affected by it. Yes?
If I were you, I'd rather feel offended. And another thing, how does racism connect to Islam? Does racism not just affect others negatively, but it also affects Allah negatively?
That's a good question. The person asked, how does racism, how does it connect to Islam? Or how does it affect people? It's a good question. So the way that it connects is what I mentioned earlier, is the relationship between a-shaytan and humanity. Because a-shaytan, he hates humanity so much that he refused to do a command that Allah told him to do because he deems himself superior. And that's exactly how racism plays out. That's exactly how al-asabiyya, xenophobia, plays out. When people deem themselves superior to other people based on things that they can't even prove, based on things that they have no control over. Yes?
Do you think the shaitan is a cheater?
Do I think he's a cheater? Yeah, definitely. The shaitan, he doesn't play fair. And this is, I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is why we're always reminded to seek refuge with Allah from a shaitan. Because he has many natural advantages over the human being. Like, for example, the jinn, the fire beings, the beings that Allah created from smokeless flames, from fire. We're not able to see the jinn in their real form. The average jinn has a longer lifespan than the average human. The average jinn is stronger and faster than the average human being. The jinn, they can shapeshift. They can turn into different types of creation, different types of creation. They can whisper to us without us even hearing something. And that's actually one of the things that make the whisper of the shaitan that much more negative, is that you can feel the whisper of the shaitan. It's not necessarily something that you can hear audibly. It's not necessarily a sound. It's something that just penetrates your being, it penetrates your soul. It can be the whisper of the shaitan is not necessarily something that you can hear. The whisper of the shaitan is something that's like a vision that you just have in your mind, or a feeling, or a desire, or an inclination towards something. All of this included is considered al-waswasa, the whisper, the deception of the shaitan. So in terms of what the brother mentioned, connecting it to al-Islam, even during the lifetime of Muhammad, peace be upon him, there were incidences in which the Sahaba, the companions, may Allah be pleased with them all together, they faced xenophobia, they faced racism, they faced discrimination. Like, for example, many of the Banu Aus and Banu Khazraj, right? These were two tribes in Yathrib before the Muslims got there, and they were literally war from Banu Aus and Banu Khazraj. They visited Muhammad ﷺ because they knew he was a person of justice. And he agreed to settle the dispute between Banu Aus and Banu Khazraj on the condition that they would aid him and give him refuge in Yathrib. And they agreed. And once a portion of the Muslims came to Yathrib and they ended up being renamed Al-Madinah, Muhammad, peace be upon him, based upon Allah's mercy, he was able to give him judgment to settle the dispute between Bani Aus and Bani Khazraj. And both of these tribes ended up becoming Muslim, and they ended up settling their differences. But prior to this, they were literally in a 100-year war, literally because they were from different tribes. It's like gangs, basically. Like during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Arab tribes in the Jazeera and the Arabian Peninsula, they warred with one another like they were gangs. Like the Quraysh would be like MS-13, right? And Bani Tamim would be like the Bloods and the Crips or what have you. But this is literally, we laugh, but anyone who's familiar with like gang culture and how gangs war with each other for 30, 40, 50 years, literally just over colors and blocks that people live on. This is exactly the type of ignorance that the pagan Arabs committed themselves to prior to the revelation of the Quran. They literally operated, these tribes, these people, they literally, this is exactly what the pagan Arabs would do to each other for no other reason other than they were from a different part of town. So this is how deep, this is how sinister, this is how evil Al-Asabiyyah is. And this was something that Muhammad, peace be upon him, took a very personal prophetic interest in to eradicate. But he also prophesied that this is something that will always remain within our ummah. In fact, in the Musnad of Muslim, there's a narration in which Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, he said, there are 4 things that will never escape this ummah. The first thing that he mentioned was one who brags about the accomplishments of their ancestors. The second thing that he mentioned was he who disrespects the ancestry of other people. And then the third thing that he mentioned was people relying upon the stars and the planets to determine the weather. Like how we have like people who do like horoscopes, tarot card readings, these type of things. And then the last thing that Muhammad, peace be upon him, mentioned is those who celebrate the dead. So these are the 4 things that Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that will always remain in the ummah and will never leave us. This text, and it's really important that we particularly understand the role that Al-Asabiyyah has within the lives of Muslims, and we have to work and we have to help each other to eradicate those things, right? And one of the things about Al-Shaytan is that unfortunately, he's been successful at convincing human beings to discriminate against each other using any and every method possible. Like, for example, people in the room who wear glasses, right? I can't really speak about the young people here, but I remember when I was younger, people hated wearing glasses. Like, glasses are very fashionable now, right? But when I was younger, if you wore glasses, people picked on you. It still happens. People said it still happens, right? So, but by definition, that's al-asabiyyah. That's xenophobia. Why? Because you're oppressing someone based on something they have little or no control over. We have no control. We have very little control as to how well we're able to see, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. There are certain things that you can do that can enhance your vision, or there are things that you can do that can make your vision worse. But just by and large, most people who need glasses, right, they need them because it's something that they can't control. So for you to mock someone for wearing glasses, or to call it like the classic, this is something you don't know how much of an effect that it may have on a young person. Because oftentimes people are self-conscious about imagery, because perception is reality. So if you make fun of someone, it immediately attacks their self-esteem. Now, by a show of hands, who's heard of this word self-esteem before? Self-esteem. Self-esteem. Okay. Now, by a show of hands, who knows what the word self-esteem means? Okay. The word self-esteem, it means your perception of yourself. It means how you view yourself. It means how much you love yourself. It means how much you like yourself, right? Unfortunately, because of the way our societies operate and are structured, we have a shame culture. A shame culture meaning we have a culture of people making fun of other people, right? Especially in the age of social media where people make memes and people post things about each other all the time to make people feel less than or to mock people or to make fun of people. Eventually, these things have very negative effects on your self-esteem. They have a very negative effect on how you view yourself or how you look in the mirror. And when you have low self-esteem, they can have very negative and dangerous consequences. There are some people, they start to use drugs as a result of low self-esteem. There are some people who they just abuse themselves and they allow other people to abuse them to what's called self-medicating. They do this to try to escape from the reality of their pain. And there's a lot of young people, like for example, drug addiction, right? Substance abuse. People are starting to use intoxicating substances at younger ages. Like there's literally cases of people becoming substance abusers as young as age 10. And there's probably a lot of 10-year-olds in the room right now. There are cases where people as young as age 10 are popping pills, smoking weed, Percocets, all of these types of things, stealing medicine out of like the medicine cabinet, stealing medications from their parents. They have these things called drug parties where people steal medication from home and they go to these parties and they mix the drugs up and they use these drugs, and there have been cases of people dying because of drug overdoses. Like in my role as a chaplain, as a counselor, I counsel a lot of young people in terms of substance abuse. And there have been a lot of people who I know personally who they've almost died because of drug overdoses. A lot of people. Some of the people in this room, they're the same ages as some of the people in this room. And they literally almost died because they're taking these substances, and taking these substances is a direct result of people picking on them, people making them feel less than. So no human being likes to feel less than. So sometimes when a person is not able to cope, or they're not able to deal with the pressure, or they don't have enough self-worth within themselves to rise above that negativity, what they'll do is that they'll overcompensate and they'll replace that low sense of self with a substance to try to make themselves feel better. And we have to be very, and this is why I mentioned what Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, is that the Muslim is one who protects people from their speech and their actions. Because anything that someone does, I mean, we're all held accountable to Allah for what we say and what we do. But if we're humanly responsible for someone doing something negative, Allah is going to question us about it. So let's say, for example, if I make fun of someone because of their weight, or if I make fun of someone because of their height, or if I make fun of someone because of a disability that they have, and they end up doing something negative because of what I said or what I did, Allah is going to question me as to why I said that to that person, as to why I did that to that person. If I snatch a person's glasses off and break their glasses, right? Allah is going to question me as to why I did that. If I push someone, let's say for example, if it's raining outside, right? And there's mud, and I just don't like a person, and then I push them on the ground and make their clothes dirty. Allah is going to question me as to why I did that. If I make a person feel less of themselves, if I say or just do something that makes a person feel less of themselves, or if I make fun of a person's hair, or if I make fun of a person's skin complexion, or if I make fun of a person's slanted eyes, for example, all of those things, or if I make fun of how a person walks, or if I make fun of how a person talks, or if I make fun of their language, Allah is going to question me about why I did those things. And we have no idea whether Allah is going to forgive us or punish us for those things. This is actually the main reason why we have to be very careful what we say, how we say it, who we say it to, because we really have no idea what Allah is going to forgive us for and what Allah is going to punish us for. And because we don't know that, it's very important that we're very careful about what we say and what we do to people. Because just because what you say or what you do to another person, just because it may not matter to you, that doesn't mean it doesn't matter to that person. And Allah is al-Muqsid. Allah is the ultimately just. So Allah is going to take into consideration the effects that our actions and our statements have on other people. Whether we meant them or not, or whether we claim we meant them or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is the effects that good actions have. What matters is the statements, the results that yield from those statements and from those actions. And this is why we have to be careful about what we say and what we do to people, and how we posture towards people, and how we treat people. Like, for example, Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, this is recorded in another way. He said, character will be the heaviest thing weighed on the scales. How you treat people, how you respond to people, how you make people feel, what you make people think. The results of your statements and your actions, your behavior, all of those things, these will be the most important actions. They will be the heaviest actions weighed on the scales. Because Muhammad alayhi salam, we trust that what he said is from Allah. And on that basis, we know that his statements concerning anything in Al-Islam is revelation as well. So Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, character will be the heaviest thing weighed on the scales. Our behavior, our character, how we treat people is very important. So I want to get some feedback from the audience, because I don't like talking too much. Sometimes I get long-winded. I see some people in the audience are like, when is he going to stop? So I would like to get some feedback from the audience. If you're too shy, it's okay. I hope there's not too many shy people. So, like I said, I want to get some responses, and also some of the older people, like some of the people I was speaking with prior. I want to get your sense or your feedback in terms of what racism means to you, or how it's affected you, or even how you yourself have manifested racism in your life. Because I'm sure many of us have stories in which we've either discriminated against other people, or other people have discriminated against us. Yes, young brother back. Speak up so everyone can hear you.
How is racism shown also other than like skin color,
Wait, say it again. Ask the question again.
how else is racism like shown or other than skin color?
That's a good question. So the young brother, he asked, what are the other ways in which racism is manifested, aside from hair type or hair texture or skin complexion? That's a good question. One of the things that al-asabiya, xenophobia, can be manifested. Let's say, for example, the travel bans. Raise your hand if you've heard of this term travel ban before. Okay, so the travel ban is something that was enacted by the Donald Trump administration, the current president of the United States. So he issued a travel ban that mostly affects people from Muslim countries or Muslim majority countries. So this, by definition, is a form of discrimination. So to answer your question, it doesn't necessarily always have to do with skin complexion or hair type. It just literally means in reference to what part of the world you come from, right? Or just in terms of religion, right? Because there's religious discrimination. And like I said, this travel ban that was enacted by the Trump administration, the way it was structured is that it almost exclusively applies to people being banned from traveling from Muslim countries or Muslim majority countries. Yes.
So, like, is there like, has there ever been like a time where racism has reached like criminal things? Like, it's been that bad?
Wait, say it again, say it again.
Has there ever been like a time where racism has reached like criminal?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. The person asked, was there ever a time in which racism has been like very like? Oh, well, currently, one of the most recent cases, there was a Muslim woman in Australia who was pregnant, and she was like almost beaten to death. Right. Literally the reason why that happened is because she was Muslim. That's the only reason. that by definition is a form of al-asabiyya, is a form of discrimination. So this person literally took it upon themselves to oppress another human being for no other reason than the fact that they're of a different religion. Inshallah, when you get home, there's a verse in the Quran that I want you guys to really like to read because it's important. I mean, obviously every ayah in the Quran is important, but this one is particularly important. It's from Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter of the Grail, chapter 5, verse 8. There's a section in the verse where Allah says, "And never let your hatred against any people prevent you from behaving justly." What this means is that even if you have a negative opinion or a negative view about a person or a people, it never gives you the Islamic justification to treat another person badly. Like, for example, this situation that I mentioned in Australia, this is a classic example of a person treating another person unjustly exclusively because they're of a different religion. For no other reason. The person didn't attack this person. The person didn't say anything mean-spirited to this person. This person, they didn't even know each other. This person just took it upon themselves to approach these people and to attack them. And these things happen all the time. Even in New York City, there are things like this that happen all the time. You have people who are cab drivers or people who are on their way to school and they get cut in the face or they get shot. And all of these things are literally because of discrimination, of al-asabiyya, xenophobia. You have people who are just randomly walking in the train or on the train and they get attacked by people, or they'll get robbed, or they'll get their phone snatched. All of these types of aggressions many of these things are based upon just a person deeming themselves superior to another person. Whether they feel that the person is weaker than they are, or whether they view the person as less of a human being than they are. Right? Someone mentioned Martin Luther King, right? So, unfortunately, in the United States, there's a lot of things that really haven't changed since the time of Martin Luther King. I'll give you some examples. When Barack Obama was the president of the United States, on average, for every year that he was president, there was a reported lynching of a black person. On average, for every year that he was president. He was president for 8 years. If you do research about lynchings in the United States during Obama's presidency, on average, for every year that he was president, there was a reported lynching in the United States. Yes.
Wait, Barack Obama would never do that. Did you just see that, or did he just do that on purpose? Because I know he would never do that. He's a totally honest and innocent person. He always wants to be nice to immigrant families like us.
Well, unfortunately, there's been drastic changes since the last administration, the Obama administration, and referring to the Trump administration. But there are many continuities as well. Let's say, for example, the ICE camps that people have heard about, like these detention camps. These detention camps where they house immigrants or what they deem as illegal immigrants, these ICE camps on the U.S.-Mexico border, they've been in existence since I was in high school. They've been around for a long time, since the Clinton administration, since the early 90s. They've had ICE camps. They've had Border Patrol camps since the early 90s. So this concept of immigration detainment or immigrant detainees, this is not a new thing. It's just that there's been more exposure to the horrible conditions of people in these detention camps.
Wait,
You had a question?
What is that? You said there's like a camp. What is the...
Right. So in the news, this comes up a lot in terms of the ICE camps, right? So ICE is an organization in the United States government. It means Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So basically the role of ICE is to make sure that no one comes into the United States illegally. So all along the U.S. border, the U.S.-Canada border and the U.S.-Mexico border, they have these ICE agents, and they also have they have what's called CPB, Customs and Border Patrol. So Customs and Border Patrol and Immigration, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, CPB and ICE, they're basically two sides of the same coin, even though they're separate organizations. Their role is almost the same. So when they catch people trying to sneak into the United States, they take them to these, what they call detention camps. And they could be there anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 years. And because they're undocumented, a lot of negative things happen to people. There have been reports that people's children were sold off to people by ICE agents, by CPB agents. This is confirmed, this is in the news. People have people's children out. This is literally all because of philosophy. This is all because of xenophobia, discrimination, hatred against the other, hatred against other people who are not like other people.
That's so cool and unfair.
Yeah. So these things are happening all the time. Like, for example, there have been people who I know personally, and I know people who know them personally. ICE has come to these people's doorsteps. Like ICE, they'll come to your home 2:30 in the morning, and they'll literally drag you out of your home and arrest you. And they've been at work, and they've been waiting for them at work. And not even before they get off work, while they're at work, ICE agents, they'll come to them and they'll drag them out of school or out of work, and they'll arrest them and they'll never be seen again. Yes. That's a good question. The government, obviously the US government, they will say that these people are here illegally and they need to be processed and they may have a criminal record and all of this and all of that. But really it's because it's discrimination against people who are the other, right? And by the other, the United States itself has a very dark history of what's known as white supremacy. So white supremacy basically means that anyone who is of European descent is favored high, and anyone who is not of European descent is favored low. So this tradition of white supremacy still exists within the United States, even to the extent where you have some people from Muslim countries where they register themselves as white in the immigration process just so they don't have to worry about being discriminated against. This is how fearful they are of being discriminated against in terms of the power structure in the United States, which is white supremacy. And even in terms, yes? Is the president racist? That's a good question. The answer is yes.
He's totally it. I wish he would die.
And there's many people in the Trump administration that are racist. I've actually met one of the people who used to be part of Donald Trump's administration. There's actually a movie about him called American Dharma. His name is Steve Bannon. So in this movie called American Dharma, Steve Bannon, he was actually the chief, he was actually head of the White House staff when Donald Trump first became president. I actually met Steve Bannon in person and had personal conversations with Steve Bannon. And his views are very similar to the general views as Donald Trump. Like, for example, there was a rally in Charlottesville. I think, was it Charlottesville, Virginia or South Carolina? One of those southern states. It was Charlottesville. And in the process of this riot, there was a person who ran over people with their cars. And a person had died. But when Donald Trump spoke about this event in Charlottesville, he said, oh, those are good people. It was just a few of them that messed up, but everybody else is mostly cool. So he was very nonchalant and blasé about the violent nature of these Charlottesville protests. But the Charlottesville protests were literally based on white nationalism. And you have people who are very vocal about being pro-white nationalism. Like the person that I mentioned that I personally had conversations with, Steve Bannon, he's a well-known white nationalist. And he was the former editor-in-chief of a news outlet known as Breitbart. He used to be the editor-in-chief of Breitbart. Breitbart is kind of like it's kind of like the Time magazine of white nationalist rhetoric. It's like the Time magazine of white supremacist propaganda. So this editor-in-chief of Breitbart at the time, I met him personally, and I had personal conversations with him. And like I said, his views on race relations, white power, white supremacy, these things completely are parallel to the common theme and the common posture of the Trump administration. But what a lot of people don't realize is that when Obama became president, Barack Obama, unlike President Trump, right? President Trump was he's very outlandish. He's very open and honest with his views about race relations. But Barack Obama's a little different. Unlike Donald Trump, Barack Obama he operated from, the way he operated, he had a white man's mind but a black man's face, basically. So the way he postured, in spite of the fact that he had an African mother and an African father and a Euro-American mother, his postures in terms of governance and government were really not in the favor of the other. They really weren't in the favor of Afro-Americans. They weren't in the favor of diversity as it was promoted through the Obama administration. And because of that, because of this imagery of a black man being president, people fell asleep, and people started to spew this rhetoric of, a colorless America, or racism died, or racism ended. But what really happened is that it made people fall asleep. And when Donald Trump became the next president, immediately all of these racial tensions, these ethnocentric, xenophobic tensions were dormant. And because they were dormant, because they weren't up on the surface, a lot of people, they allowed themselves to pretend that xenophobia no longer exists in the United States. But when Donald Trump became president, it was just overt business as usual. So when Donald Trump became president, people were like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening in America. This is our America. No, this is the same America from 1783, 1787. Very few things have changed. This is the same America from 1955. This is the same America from 1978, 1924. This is the same America. The only difference is the times. But the xenophobic themes in the United States are still the same. It's just that they've constantly changed form. See, the thing about xenophobia is that depending on the time period, it's always going to change its face. It's always going to change its form, but it's always the same substance. And again, just as Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, there's four things that will never leave this ummah. People who boast of the accomplishments of their ancestry, and those who disrespect the ancestry of others. And that's a common theme in the legacy of the United States. Males, and they have a high propensity to disrespect the legacy and the heritage and ancestries of other people. So these things are an ever-evolving, never-ending phenomenon. But we have to be aware. And it's very, like I said, the subject is very dense. To hear or brought their children with them, I want you to continue the conversation at home. And obviously you know your children better than I do, so you can explain things to them in a way that perhaps I may not be able to explain, right? And those of you who are like junior high school age, if your parents aren't here, I want you to start having conversations with your parents about these type of things, right? And obviously you know your parents better than I do, so you can posture and you can express yourselves to your parents in ways that I really can't. But these conversations are very necessary because we're living in a world where al-Asabiyya is becoming more weaponized and it's becoming more prominent and it's becoming more violent. And especially in terms of Muslim immigrant communities, the new waves of Muslim immigrant communities, some of you have parents who have only been in the United States for maybe 10 or 15 years versus other communities where they've been here for almost 100 years, right? So the way that they're able to navigate in the American landscape is going to be significantly different. And because their ability to navigate in the American landscape is going to be different, we need to help each other, and we need to educate each other, and we need to bring each other up to speed as to what to expect in this terrain, in this landscape. And we have to share, we have to do information sharing with each other in terms of how to instill and cultivate it, just like get caught in the crossfire and lost in the cracks. Right? How much time do I have left? Am I good with time? Okay. So, anyone else have any, yes? Speak up loud so everybody can hear you. Good question. Our young sister, she asked me, was I Muslim born or am I a Muslim revert? The answer to that question is that I'm a Muslim revert, meaning I became Muslim. I became Muslim when I was 15 years old. I became Muslim when I was in high school. Yes. Huh? How old am I right now? Okay, so since you asked me, take a guess how old I am.
35.
Okay. I'll just say
22. One. Just 1 month old. 1 month old. Just 1 month. You're 1 month old.
On the Islamic calendar, I'm 39, and on the Gregorian calendar, I'm 37.
So you're 39.
No, I'm not 59. I'm
39. No, you said 30. I said 39. I said 30. I said 39.
Yeah. Yes, you have a question. Yes. Speak up so everyone can hear you. Yeah, let me do my dash.
What are your thoughts on the Black Panther Party? What are your thoughts on their actions and all that? Yeah.
That's a good question. Our brother, he asked me, what's my opinion on my thoughts on the Black Panther Party? So the Black Panther Party has an interesting history. The Black Panther Party actually evolved from a student organization known as Students for Nonviolence Committee, right? Known as SNCC in the 50s and 60s. This organization branched off from what was known as the Southern Leadership Conference, headed by Martin Luther King Jr. What eventually ended up happening is that in the 60s, this student group, they wanted to be more active in terms of pushing back against white supremacy. The Southern Leadership Conference, they took a more passive approach in terms of combating white supremacy. But this student group, they wanted to take a more active approach. Like basically, they were tired of being spat on and beaten up and lynched, right? So they wanted to fight that. And what ended up happening is that there ended up being very significant rift between this youth wing of the civil rights movement and the elder wing of the civil rights movement. So out of all of that, division, it gave rise to what was known initially as the Black Panther movement. So there was the Black Panther movement first, and then it evolved into the Black Panther Party. Now, when it evolved into the Black Panther Party, the United States government, via the FBI, they initiated a clandestine intelligence probing mechanism known as COINTELPRO, which still exists. So they infiltrated these groups, these pro-black groups, in the hopes of dismantling the progress of these groups. And what ended up happening is that because of the infiltration, it actually tainted the integrity of the Black Panther Party. And what I think about them today is that there are people that are trying to revamp the old mechanism of the Black Panther Party, but coming from a perspective of being Muslim first, is that any system or any change that you want, it has to be predicated on revelation. Because in all reality, if you don't have the help of Allah, nothing that you do is going to be successful. So one of the reasons why many of these initiatives that people have, past and present, one of the reasons why these things don't work is because they're not based upon Al-Islam. So this system or any other system that you live under, if it's not based upon revelation, by definition, it's not going to be based upon justice. And any system that's not based upon justice, history has proven that eventually is going to fail. So based on that, is that us as Muslims, right, in terms of what you mentioned about my thoughts on the Black Panther Party, is that the premise about the upliftment of Black people is a positive thing, but as me being a Muslim Afro-American, I always have to keep in my frontal lobe is that I have to be Muslim first. So any initiative that I'm aware of is that you have to operate from being Muslim first and everything else second. But see, the problem with many of these pro-Black groups, they function as completely a reactionary mechanism to combat white supremacy, and a lot of times they end up having that reverse effect, right? So what ends up happening is that you have these different fragmentations of like the Black conscious people or like this fake woke movement, and what ends up happening is that these people are naysayers to revelation, they're naysayers to guidance, they're naysayers to Al-Islam. And in fact, many of these people themselves in these pro-Black groups, they're Islamophobic themselves. And they discriminate against Muslims and they slander Al-Islam and all of these types of things. So just from an objective view, is that anything that is against injustice obviously is a good thing. But Al-Islam always has to be at the forefront, if that makes sense. Yes. Okay, cool. Someone has a story. Where's the mic? Yeah. Wait, shh. You want to hear a story?
This happened at recess. So my two best friends, Adriana and Lily, they had a fight, and I don't know why. But then I was trying to cheer up one of my friends, Adriana, and she said to me, no offense, but Lily's acting like a white girl.
Okay.
Dang racist girl.
Wait. Is that the whole story, or is there more to the story? That's it? Okay. So when your friend said that, right? Wait. Keep the mic. I want to answer the question. Yeah. So when the person said that to you, right? How did that make you feel when the person said that?
I was actually surprised because Adriana would never say that to me because I know Adriana and Lily are like close friends and they would never say that to each other.
So like did it make you feel bad that one of your friends said that to one of your other friends or?
Yeah.
Okay. So when the person said that, what do you think they meant when they said that? What do you think they were trying to say?
Like, she told me that, because one of my friends, like, they like playing gymnastics, right? So she said that Lily always needs help and she's wasting her time and she's too sensitive, and she said that she just wants to get over with it and stuff like that. I feel like she's tired of her.
So did you get a chance to speak with either of them about what was said? Or do you think that you just wanted to stay out of it?
I just wanted to not get involved.
Okay. Did you tell like one of your parents or did you tell a teacher about what happened? Okay. So what I would like you to do is when you go home, I want you to talk with your parents about it. To try to see how they can help you cope with that type of situation. Because I can see it in your face that it affects you pretty deeply. It cut pretty deeply. So I think you displayed a lot of courage through telling your story. And what a lot of people don't understand is that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the willingness and ability to confront fear. So you expressed something that made you fearful, right? You expressed something that you felt here, right? And you were courageous, right? It wasn't something easy for you to say, right? But in spite of that, Allah empowered you with a type of courage, and you allowed yourself to be expressive and to tell your story. And that's important. It's important that people like you think and feel that they have a voice, right? So this is the point of this gathering, right? So people like yourself can feel validated. It's important that you're comfortable, and I'm grateful to Allah that you were comfortable sharing your story. It's important. It's very important. And all of us should feel important that if something is bothering us, we should be able to come to the Muslims and share our story and to be able to let it out without being judged, without being made fun of. These are very important things. What's your name? Huh? Jude? May Allah bless you. I'm very happy that you shared your story. I'm very grateful for that. And again, if your parents are here, I want them to know that you should be proud of your daughter. Very proud. And it's a strong reflection of the parenting that Allah allowed you to instill into her, and may Allah bless you for your parenting. Ameen. And may Allah continue to bless you for your parenting. And may Allah continue to make you like this, a person who displays courage in the face of fear. Thank you. Yes. Okay, someone has another story.
Almost every day, there was a girl named Jayla and a boy named David. He was from Texas, and he kind of had those eyes like that.
Right.
And Jayla would always like make fun of him, and she would call him Choo King.
Right.
And no one would do anything about it. She would just stand and stare there. I wasn't a bystander, so I went and I stood up for them. And now Jayla, she's like kind of scaring me, and I don't really like her.
Okay. So when you stood up for this person, right? How did it make you feel knowing that you helped someone that was being bullied, that was being picked on? Tell me what you thought. Tell me what you felt when you were able to stand up for someone and help them. How did it make you feel knowing that you helped someone? Guys,
Hey, quiet please.
I
Akiva.
was a little scared because she was the person that had like that sex attitude.
right.
So I think it was even worse. I
Well, I'm grateful that you displayed courage as well, because you mentioned that you were scared, right? And like I said before, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the willingness and ability to confront fear. So you saw someone who was being bullied, right? You saw someone who was being treated badly, right? And there's a very important lesson in that, because Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, when any of you witness something wrong, he must change it with his hand, right? He must stop it, right? And then he also said, if he's not able to do it, then he must speak against it. And if he's not able to, then he must hate it in his heart, which is the weakest of the three, right? So what's interesting is that both of you displayed different elements of that narration. So the first sister, she didn't do anything about it. She didn't speak out against it, but she hated it, right? Then the next sister, she did the first thing. She changed it with her hands, right? This is a very important, monumental lesson for all of us on how to gauge oppression, about how to deal with oppression. Because dealing with oppression is very important. And if two young people like yourselves can do that for someone, right, then that means grown-ups like myself have zero excuse to not stop oppression when we see it, right? Because it only takes one person to make the world better. And Allah has placed potential inside every human being to make the world better. And both of you are proof of that. Both of you are proof that it only takes one person to make the world better. So with that one act that you did for that person, you don't know how much of a deep effect positive that has on a person. That one thing you did, sticking up for that person, that's going to carry with that person for the rest of their life. Even if they don't remember you, they're going to remember that action. And it's going to stay with them. Even if we never see those people again, if those people manifest the good that we imparted to them, that we cultivated them upon, even if we never come in contact with that person again, as long as that person lives, we get reward for them manifesting that action. And if they have children, and they teach their children that, we get reward for that. Or if they teach that to their parents, as long as their parents live, we get reward for that. If they teach their classmates, their siblings, their neighbors, this is the power of the ripple effect. So again, I'm grateful to our two sisters for sharing their story, and may Allah reward you and reward your parents, because you displayed an immense amount of positive character. So anyone else? Yes.
Do you think
Shh, I want to hear what you have to say.
do you think that somebody would be born with being able to hate, or is it something that they would have to learn, and that they would think that it's normal, so that they get used to it?
That's a good question. The answer to that question is that al-asabiya xenophobia is not genetic. There's no such thing as a racism gene. There's no such thing as a racist gene. So anything that is not inherently part of our genetic makeup, our genetic code, we know that it's a result of taught and learned behavior. No one is born a xenophobe. No one is born pro-asabiya. No one is born a racist. All of these things are learned and taught behavior. So because a lot of people, they have, especially things like philosophy, they may have an argument, nature versus nurture. So in terms of asabiya, xenophobia, it's 0% nature and it's 100% nurture. So let's say, for example, if you take two random children from different parts of the world without external societal influence and you just put them in the same space, they're not going to discriminate against each other. They're just going to play like kids. But it's our societies, it's our siblings, whether they're older, or our parents, or our societies. We get those type of ideas externally from our societies to hate. Hatred for another human being is not from fitrah. It's not from the nature that Allah created human beings with. This is from the deception of the shaitan, coupled with the corruption of other human beings. So it's definitely, it's not something natural. It's not genetic. So there's no such thing as an asabiya gene. This is exclusively something that people are groomed to be. This is something that people are groomed to do in terms of human behavior. Yes?
Why is racism called racism, and why is it a thing?
That's a good question. The young brother, he asked the question, he said, why is racism called racism, and why is it a thing? That's a good question. Even the whole concept of race, of what race is, the concept race itself is racist by definition. Because in all reality, all human beings are of the same race. Humanity is one race. There's no such thing as different races. All humans, genetically, by and large, were basically the same. It's just that topically, superficially, out of Allah's wisdom and mercy, He has created us differently to test each other, right? And that's okay. What's not okay is that we use these external differences to oppress each other. That's what's not okay. So racism, by show of hands, who's familiar with the Hindu caste system? Or who's heard of it, right? So the way racism, the way white supremacy functions in the United States, it functions almost exactly like how the Hindu caste system functions. Because the maslaha, the purpose of the Hindu caste system, the purpose of it is the intent, the niyyah, the intent of it is to keep people at a certain level perpetually, like forever, ever, right? So you obviously in the United States you have European people at the top, right? And you have like people who were like immigrants who first came, they're like at the bottom, they're like the untouchables, right? And then everyone else kind of like falls in between, right? So this is like color coded. It's like color coded asabiya, right? So colorism is literally like the worst form of asabiya because you literally can't change your skin complexion, right? Even if you bleach your skin, right? That still doesn't replace the fact that you are, right? And again, go back to even like race. That concept race is racist by definition because the concept race is exclusively a white supremacist invention. Like literally prior to the European colonization of the Western Hemisphere, the concept of race never existed. This is literally the concept race, even in the English language, the concept race is a very new concept. No, this is my point. Even that concept race is racist in and of itself because all human beings are of the same race. All human beings are Banu Adam. All humanity are children of Adam, right? But racism, it gives this false perception, this pseudo narrative that different means superior, and it doesn't. Different just means different. Different doesn't translate to superior or inferior. And even if you look at the definition of what white is or what whiteness is, and then you look at black or what blackness is, right? You look at the dictionary with the term white. All of the definitions and descriptions of white or whiteness is positive. You look in the dictionary, all of the descriptions and definition of black or blackness is negative. Darkness, evil, things like this. And this is why they impose that on non-European peoples. This is why it's done. And this is why this concept, racism, is evil by definition, right? So even in terms of race, that concept race is just a wrong concept to buy into anyway. And certain parts of the world, they bought into it more than others. Like I'll give you an example. In the Indian subcontinent, they already had issues pertaining to ethnocentrism, asabiya, xenophobia. But when the British conquered India, that made their concept of xenophobia that much worse. Because they literally copied and pasted the British spin on asabiya, the British spin on xenophobia. And you see it now. You see people who are dancing in Bollywood, when they first come into Bollywood, they're like my complexion. And then by the time their career spikes, they're the same complexion as the ceiling. You see it all the time. You know, like anywhere you go, particularly in the Muslim world. Particularly in the Muslim world where they've either been colonized by the British or by the French, you see this desire for whiteness. You see it everywhere. You see it all the time, right? Even in terms of, let's say, for example, narrations that depict the skin complexions of the Arabs during the time of Muhammad, right? What's very interesting is that even prior to the revelation of the Quran, the way the Arabs would identify themselves in terms of skin complexion, they would use words, they would use colors that didn't have the same meaning in regular language. Like, for example, like you see white, right? Right, like the wall. In the Arabic language, the word abyad or bayda, right? In regular language, it means what we see. But in terms of skin complexion, that's not what it means. Like, for example, prior to the revelation of the Quran, and even during the revelation of the Quran, in terms of how Arabs would classify themselves in terms of skin complexion, if they look at me, they would call me Abyad. They would call me Abyad. They would call me white. Because the skin complexion that they're referring to is not the same as regular language. Like, for example, they would call people who were Persian or Greek or Roman, they would call them Asfar. They would call them Sufra. They would call them yellow or yellowish. Or people who were very light-skinned, they would call them Ahmar or Humra. They would call them like red or reddish. And people who were very, very dark, they would call them Akhdar. They would call them green. Like, I've literally seen people that are so dark that they have a green tint to their skin. I've seen this in the Arab world, and I've seen this in the United States. Like, for example, I remember I was visiting one of my patients. She was from Morocco. And when I was working in the hospital, I was working at another hospital at the time. And she said that she only spoke 2 languages. She said she only spoke Arabic and French. So I don't speak French, so I was speaking to her in Arabic. As soon as I opened my mouth and I started speaking to her in Arabic, literally the first thing she asked me, she said, "Oh, are you from Yemen?" I was like, "Wow." I'm like, "That's interesting." So that's not the first time that someone has asked me that. I'll give you another funny story. I was at a restaurant in New York City. The restaurant's not open anymore. There was a Muslim brother. He was from Bangladesh. He was the cook. He saw they were Muslims at the table. He came out and he gave us salams. And the brother, he literally asked me, was I from Bangladesh and Bangla? Like, literally, he asked me was I from Bangladesh and Bangla. So I just found it interesting because it just shows you that in terms of skin complexion composition, outside of the Western world, outside of white supremacist influence, it's translated and it manifests itself so differently. Very, very differently. So, again, going back to this thing about race, literally the reason why it's used is to keep most of the world's population down here and a small, minute percentage of people up here. It's one of the most elitist systems known to man. You know, like even like say for example, and this is why it's important. Hi, Simon, how are you? She's like, who is this? Like, this is not the regular guy on Friday. So even in terms of how religious text is translated, right? For example, we know the famous narration pertaining to the argument that Abu Dhar had with Bilal bin Rabah, may Allah be pleased with him, right? So in the narration, it's reported in Al-Bukhari. So it mentions that Abu Dhar and Bilal had a discrepancy, they had an argument, and they had a falling out. But what most people don't know is that what's commonly mentioned is that Abu Dhar called Bilal son of a black woman. But that's actually not what Abu Dhar said. There's no historical proof that Abu Dhar ever said to Bilal son of a black woman. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani actually mentions in detail, he explains in Fath al-Bari, which is one of the commentaries, the most famous commentary of Sahih al-Bukhari. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani mentions that this was known as a commentative add-on. It was a scholastic assumption by al-Bukhari. So oftentimes the scholars of hadith, what they would do in their manasib and their musnads and their hadith narration collections, they would give shuruh. They would give commentaries on ahadith, and they would connect the shuruh to the narrations themselves. But most people who don't study ulum al-hadith or mustal al-hadith, they wouldn't know this. You just read a translation and you just see it and you consider that part of the narration. But it wasn't part of the narration. It was just something that al-Bukhari scholastically concluded. But it wasn't really what Abu Dhar said to Bilal. And even according to the classic Muslim Arab historians, Ibn Sa'd and Al-Dhahabi, they literally describe Abu Dhar as Rajul al-Aswad, black man in terms of his dark skin. So even this concept, blackness, it wasn't something foreign to Arab peoples, even prior to the revelation of the Quran. And even Bilal himself, those same historians that I mentioned, Ibn Sa'd and Al-Dhahabi, they mentioned directly word for word in their writings, Laysa Bilalu Habashiyyan. They straight up they said Bilal was not Abyssinian. Because what ended up happening, Bilal ibn Rabah, his story is very interesting. Because oftentimes what would happen prior to the revelation of the Quran in terms of slavery is that when the Arabs, when they would enslave people, if you were born into slavery and if your family came from a lineage of slavery, if your mother was non-Arab, they would force you to take the heritage of your mother who was a slave. But if your father was free, they wouldn't do that. Or if both your parents were free, they wouldn't do that. But if both of your parents were slaves, and if your mother who was a slave was non-Arab, they would force you to take the nasab or the urfiyya of your mother as a sign of disrespect. This is what they would do. Yes. Huh? Huh? A story? You have a story? Okay. Yeah. Yes. No. This is prior to the revelation of the Quran. Right. Prior. And even in terms of when people say before Islam, we have to be very careful when we say that because Al-Islam existed before the revelation of the Quran because we know that the first human Muslim was Adam alayhi salam because he was the first prophetic individual. And even the jinn, they had Al-Islam before the human being. And we know that even Ash-Shaytan himself was once Muslim before he committed apostasy. So this is what the Arabs, this is what they were known to do. They were known to do this. And it was a sign of disrespect. And this is why Allah says in the Quran in chapter 33 verse 5 in Surah Al-Ahzab, the chapter of the Confederates, the chapter of the partisans, Allah says, Allah says, call them by their fathers, address them by their fathers. Because an-nasab, genealogy, is from father, is from child to father. Why? Because Allah says, Banu Adam, Bani Adam, we are the children of Adam. Because Adam alayhi salam was the first human, and he was a man, and that's why the nasab, that's why the genealogy is paternal. It's from child to father. So this is the case of Bilal ibn Rabah. So when he was a slave, before he was free, they discriminated against Bilal because his mother was non-Arab. And because his mother was non-Arab, they forced him to take the genealogy of his mother. But when the Quran was revealed, the Muslim historians, they confirmed that Bilal ibn Rabah was not African, that he was not Abyssinian, that he was not Habashi, but he was Arab because his father, Rabah, was from Bani Jum'ah, one of the families of Quraysh. 5 more minutes? Okay, we have 5 more minutes. There's someone who they said they had a story. Okay, yeah. Where's the mic? Where's the mic? Okay. So we got time for one more story. So I got like 5 minutes, so my time is running out.
There's a boy in like school, and he's like, what is his name? He's like, had a oof and a oof. He looks like he's that I don't know. And then after that, he also whenever I see him, like he's so annoying. He also that when I work.
Gosh.
I always say that when I do my work, and I get so annoyed, and they keep telling me to stop, and I never done.
Okay. So when he bothers you, how does that make you feel? When he bothers you?
Like I get so annoyed, like I'm so mad. I just want to.
Well, don't punch him. we're not promoting unnecessary violence. Don't punch him. Did you tell your teacher or your parents? Okay. So I think you should tell your parents, and that your parents should probably have a conversation with his parents so that he should stop bothering you. Okay?
What?
His parent is the teacher. So yeah, so you should definitely tell his parents. So that's what we call that. That's what grown-ups call a conflict of interest. So you should definitely tell your parents. But don't hit him. Don't hit him. Please don't. Yeah, I know your head doesn't want you to hit him, but don't let your fist tell you to hit him. Okay? So don't let your fist listen to your head. Okay? Don't hit him.
Today I was happy because Greg was absent.
Oh.
I was happy.
Hey, this guy.
Okay, so yeah, you say you got a story? Okay. Guys, this is the last story, so we're gonna have to listen up.
his name is Abdullah.
Oh, Abdullah, I remember his.
Makes he was one day when we were talking to each other, he was backbiting about his friends in the park, and then and the teacher was eavesdropping, so she came in and said, why do you like to make friends with black people on the streets?
Ouch. Okay, so when that was said, tell me what you were thinking when the person said that.
She was racist.
How did it make you feel to have a teacher say something like that?
Upset?
Did you speak to the teacher about what she said?
He said.
Oh, he.
Who?
Wait, was the teacher male or female?
Female.
Female. Did you speak to your teacher about what they said?
No, but my friend did.
Your friend did? Okay.
He kept complaining, why are you so racist?
What was the response to the teacher?
Huh?
Like, did the teacher say anything after your friend responded?
She just ignored it.
Wow.
That's bad. Something disciplinary should definitely happen to that teacher. Did you speak to your parents about it?
No.
I think you should.
No.
I think you should speak with your parents about it.
No.
One of the reasons why the subject of race is so sensitive is because we don't want to talk about it. It's like this elephant in the room that's breaking all of the it's like an elephant in the room that's breaking all the glass, but we're complaining about the glass being broken, but we pretend like there's not an elephant in the room. So we really have to have these conversations. So what I think you should do, I think you should have a conversation with your parents about what you thought and how they made you feel, and try to get some advice from your parents to how to deal with that type of situation if it happens again. Okay?
I don't know if this is a thing, but I heard in the UK. I heard in the UK, April 3rd is like Punish Muslim Day.
Oh, the Punish a Muslim Day. Yeah, I remember this happened last year. There was something that circulated. If I'm not mistaken, I think fortunately they were able to apprehend the person that had commissioned that letter. If I'm not mistaken, I'll have to research it. But even those type of things are very important to know, and I'm glad you do know that. And it's important to know who hates us, right? But more importantly, it's important for us to know who we hate. Because we can't control who or what other people hate. We can control who or what we hate, right? So it's very important that we focus on ourselves, our own actions, as opposed to the actions of other people, right? We can't control the actions of people. We can only respond to the actions of people. But we can control our own actions, right? So just like you were very conscious about what that person wrote, it behooves all of us, it mandates all of us to be conscious and aware of whether or not we're doing those similar things to other people. So I think we're out of time, unfortunately. This is really great, really cool being with you guys. I hope that Allah gives me an opportunity to be in this type of gathering again. So the organizers of this, they have my contact info, so if you guys are willing to have me again, I'm more than willing to make time and come again. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه اجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله.
Waalaikumsalam. Waalaikumsalam. Adios.